Awesome. All right, welcome everybody. So I'm going to try to do this, at least a couple times a month, if not weekly, depending on, how interested people are and people are showing up. And since we have a couple of people who I've worked with here, and we have some people that are maybe new to the whole paradigm. So I guess I'll just start off like introducing myself, and just talking about like my history. Uh, you know, Grew up in America, so grew up on all of the processed foods, and my whole health journey through being diagnosed with Lyme. Was poisoned with Accutane as a kid. Put on a whole bunch of medications. Took uh, antihistamines and allergy shots for years, and then started trying to get healthy, and doing all the quote unquote healthy things, but actually like still getting worse because nobody ever talked about iron and all of the relationships to all of my chronic inflammation and all my symptoms. And the fact that, for many generations now, since the 1940s, almost, 99% of the wheat products that we consume are enriched with added iron. And the effect that iron has on our hormones and our metabolism. And nobody talks about this. So it took me years and years and years to finally piece all this stuff together. And, it even traced back to the Accutane, because that's a synthetic vitamin A, and that has a dramatic impact on your iron regulation, similar to being an alcoholic. Alcohol also has a profound impact on our iron regulation, as does birth control and pregnancy and just general stress. So what I've come to realize, and part of my healing journey, was that iron accumulation is kind of a fact of aging, and it's something that if we understand it, we can work with that process. And admit one guest. And if we understand it and we can work with that process, then we can mitigate. But if we're unaware, then it's just silently harming us, and it's the process of aging. So kind of like the Iron Man in the Wizard of Oz. As we get older and go through life, more and more iron accumulates in our bodies, and that leads to rust and things breaking down and falling apart. So, at the beginning of the process, iron tends to accumulate in specific areas where it's going to be the easiest to deal with. So it starts off in in the liver, but then that gets overwhelmed. It ends up in other organs and other fatty tissue in the body, where that causes oxidative damage. And if that oxidative damage actually destroys tissue, that's ferroptosis. And so when you see people like myself who are dealing with chronic inflammation, this is what's actually happening. Okay, because inflammation itself is not an accident. It's the body responding to damage, trying to heal it. And so this is where you'll also hear things like mast cell activation, or you'll hear histamine intolerance, or just high histamine, like tons of food sensitivities and allergies and mold sensitivities, and all of these things are all related. They're all caused by a body that's just struggling to maintain itself because there's so much rust happening. And then that will get confused because now you're diagnosing the symptoms of this, and being lumped into a disease. And this is when we start to have problems, because most of the ways that we treat disease as a group of symptoms is just suppressing the healing process and making iron accumulation worse. So we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to just start from scratch and say, first acknowledge that, like, yes, we might have these symptoms that we're dealing with. They're obviously not getting better from what we're doing because nobody's addressing this correctly. Or maybe we're doing something that's like beneficial short term, and then just kicking the can down the road and making us worse, right? So we have all these people like doing parasite cleanses and heavy metal detoxes and all these things that might inadvertently create a brief window of calm in your system at the early on. And usually it's inadvertent, right? Because it's cutting out sources of unbound iron, And so the body is like kind of getting a brief respite from that attack, that assault. But then we go back into our lives and whatever else we were doing. So, okay, that's a bit of a rant, but hopefully that paints the picture. I want make sure like that kind of tied in like my own journey, how that relates to everything else, right? Because with chronic Lyme, especially, there's something called anemia of chronic disease, and that can be from chronic inflammation or chronic infection. And so for a lot of people, something like a Lyme infection can be a trigger where all of a sudden the body goes into overwhelm with managing iron. It's just no longer able to do it in a way that the body can just function normally. So now the body is in survival mode. And, this can be exacerbated by a lot of different life choices. So, how we choose to eat, how we're nourishing our body is just as important as what we're eating. And that's, one of the biggest things that I teach is, learning how to eat to keep the body safe. Because when the body is feeling threatened or stressed in any way, then it's going to go into that anemia of chronic disease state, which is just there's the response to any sort of stress. And so if the body's able to manage that stress, not a big deal. If the body's overwhelmed, you're going to get all of these problems dramatically exacerbated. All right. So, yeah, I guess, what questions do people have? Just based off that introduction, what would you want to like have clarified or just discussed further, or go for it? You'll have to unmute yourself. I muted everybody.
This is Lindsay, and I've been sharing about iron, and I've been sharing about the work that we did together. And I believe I started working with you in October of 24, and it was really transformational. So by February, I no longer felt like I was on the autism spectrum, which is huge. And I've been trying to share it with people, but like if they're still depending on what paradigm they're subscribing to and maybe seeing their Western medicine practitioner regularly, it's just really deeply ingrained. Like they've been told that they have low iron, or even one friend I just met in Sarasota, she said, I invited her to this call, and she said, unfortunately, I have hemochromatosis, which she was saying like, oh, what a shame, it's really official. And then she said it doesn't respond to other treatments.
Yep.
And I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew how to, which she didn't seem receptive, and I wasn't going to push it. We're relatively new friends, and that was just her setting a boundary, which is totally fine. But I'm like, gosh, there's so much more to that. And I'm pretty sure she's doing bloodletting at the hospital like every so often. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hemochromatosis, yeah, great example, right? So she's been told that, she has acute iron overload, which, yeah, is probably true, because by the time they actually diagnose that, right,
Sure.
which usually takes years of struggling, she probably experienced that, maybe even being
Right.
told she was anemic at certain points, and then having, transfusions or being given iron supplements, because, in the Western medicine paradigm, anemia is a blanket iron deficiency.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But the reality is it's just not where they're looking.
Right.
So they're checking iron levels in the blood, maybe checking ferritin, which is indirectly related to iron stores, but even that can be misinterpreted. And then they say, oh, look, your iron levels are low. But they don't ask, they don't put into context like, oh, this person is, chronically inflamed, has hormonal issues and everything else going on, that is just preventing iron from getting into the blood where it would be measured by their tests. So it's a distribution problem, not a supply problem. And she's experiencing that directly because now they were treating it as a supply problem, and now her storage ability is completely overwhelmed. So it's flooding her bloodstream, and way in excess in the blood because the body can't get it out of the blood quickly enough to prevent harm, prevent damage.
Okay. So regardless of what it looks like regardless of the specifics, it's a problem. It's a body that can't handle iron. So we don't,
Right.
it's more complex than just give more or take it away. It's like,
Right.
why is the body doing this? Why is
Yeah.
it not processing this correctly?
Right. How does a person on the same diet, on the same
Sure.
supplement, go from being supposedly deficient to all of a sudden being acute iron overload?
Really?
Yeah. Right. And we see this in a lot of the medical literature. For example, with diabetes, right? So this is, this is the connection with metabolism. So insulin resistance is a measure of how well the body is managing iron. So you hear all these people that are like so mortally afraid of sugar, or they can only function on low carb diets and things like that. Well, it's because their insulin resistance is very high, and that's a direct result of chronic inflammation and the oxidative stress. Okay, so the body increases insulin as a protective measure, and we have studies that show like they can see this very consistently, is that people go from pre-diabetic and their iron stores measurements all look normal, and then all of a sudden their A1C goes above 5.7. So now they're outside of the pre-diabetic range, and they go into the diabetic range, and then all of a sudden their iron markers go crazy, and nothing else changed. They're eating the same way, they're doing all the same things, because again, right, it's a distribution problem. So the distribution of the iron has shifted from no longer having anywhere to store iron to keep it out of excess and circulation in the blood, and then it ends up showing up in the blood, and you see the dysregulation. And it's literally just happens overnight. Like, oh, your A1C just went a little bit higher, and then boom, now we see iron problems. Nothing else changed. The body changed the way it's managing iron. It changed its response because it was no longer able to manage the way it was managing before. And this is consistently what happens. So there's usually some sort of trigger, right? So it'll be, for a lot of women, it's like, oh yeah, when I'm birth control, and then totally messed me up and never been the same again. Or it was my third kid. For some reason, my third kid, everything fell apart. My health was never the same. Or had a car accident, or some sort of chronic or acute illness, right? So a lot of people they get COVID, and it seems like they got rid of COVID, but everything else is messed up now. They've got all these other chronic lingering issues, or something stressful. They have a stressful event, lose a loved one, lose their job, or something like that happens, and that acute stress is enough to flip it over, right? It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then this is compounding generationally, right? So we're seeing this playing out. When you're conceived, right, those cells, the egg that is initially fertilized in the sperm, and the initial cells for the first 7 days are the age and the mitochondrial genetic expression of your mother. And then around day 7, this magical thing happens where senescence is reversed. So the aging, it's an anti-aging process where the age of those cells just magically reverses, but the genetic expression of your mitochondria, which was determined by your mom's iron status when you were conceived, is what you inherit. It's crazy. It's the craziest thing. And then that becomes, our iron story. And so now we're going back, right, 1940s. So our grandparents, maybe great-grandparents, they were the experimental generation. And then going into the 60s, right, they started the iron fortification program because they're like, oh my gosh, iron deficiency is one of the highest risk things, especially for menstruating women. So we're just going to put iron into all the wheat products, into rice and all kinds of stuff, and try to help this, minimize this problem. But they found is that it didn't at all. Yes, they did that in England too. Europe, yeah, South America, Latin America, everywhere. Western food is served. And And then by the 60s, they were like, oh, let's evaluate because we're still seeing very high rates of anemia. So we're not sure if this is really working, but then it's also causing these other downstream effects, right? Where you're seeing acute iron overload in a lot in other people that were, that were not, not menstruating. And so the American Medical Association, or the FDA, whoever it was, had their panel of experts and like, let's evaluate this. And they said, well, it's not working. And the experts presented said, hey, we should probably stop this because it isn't working and it's actually causing more harm. But they said, well, maybe it's just not working because we're just not putting enough iron. So they more than doubled the requirement for added iron for it to be fortified, considered enriched. And that happened like the beginning of the 70s. And then they did it again in the 80s. And you can track, you can see the spikes in chronic illness and metabolic diseases, diabetes, cancer, and then starting in the 80s with like neurological stuff like autism, just takes off. And I believe that's directly related. You see all these kids, they're in the drive-through at Chick-fil-A. Look at the ingredients. The breading on chicken, it's enriched, iron enriched flour, right? And then that's deep fried in a vegetable oil, which is high omega-3. And so this is very important to understand because just like iron rusts in the presence of water, fat oxidizes in the presence of iron. So this is happening in our bodies and in our deep fryers and everywhere else. So where you have all this unbound iron in the presence of omega-3 fatty acids, which are much more vulnerable to oxidizing, they will oxidize. And then if we're eating these fats, even if they're not oxidized when we eat them, if we have all this iron in our body where first it accumulates in the gut and causes the first symptoms, right? So we see all these kids with all these different gut problems, especially if they do have something like autism or other chronic illnesses or developmental issues and things like that. It starts in the gut because that's the body's first defense, is to try to slow the absorption of the iron first. And so a lot of people have heard, stories of women, they're pregnant, they go to the doctor, they get blood work done. Oh, your iron is low. We're going to give you iron. And they start taking these iron pills and they get very constipated. And then they start developing, digestion issues. And then they go, I can't do that. Stop, I'm stopping the iron, can't do it. But the same thing's happening when we're eating all these enriched foods, right? And so a major problem is that there's no real uniformity to how these foods are enriched. So your slice of bread could have 2 or 3 times more iron than the slice of bread right next to it that your sibling eats for breakfast, which is insane. And then look at that, right? One serving of enriched flour is supposed to have 100% of your RDA, or I think about 100% of your RDA for iron, or crazy high number. And most people are eating multiple servings of these enriched flours every day. I mean, just consider that, right? Like, holy shit, this is direct poisoning. And if you grew up eating that food, that iron's still in your body. It doesn't just go away. We don't just get rid of it. Like you menstruate out some, right? For women, men, we don't. And this shows up with men that are on testosterone therapy. So I had a client who had developed hemochromatosis from being on testosterone therapy, because testosterone tells the body to absorb more iron. So he developed hemochromatosis. He had to get off the testosterone because people are just saying, oh, low testosterone is the disease. Well, it's not. It's the response to the iron overload. This is why we're seeing plummeting testosterone levels. I think there's other factors too, like xenoestrogens and all that other stuff. But then estrogen is kind of the opposite. Estrogen tells the body to sequester iron. So during pregnancy, estrogen as a stress hormone dramatically increases. It's to protect the developing baby from this oxidative damage, which would be terrible for a developing baby, right? And so it's telling the body sequester iron, and then so these women are being told they're anemic, but they're not. There's plenty of iron. It's being mismanaged, The body's trying to protect the mom and the baby. Tasha, you got a question?
Yes. This is all very disturbing to be reminded of, but thank you. I have two questions that may have different answers, may have the same answer.
Sure.
One is for someone like me who's like worked with you, I'm like kind of got my basics covered. I've already healed a lot.
Mhm.
There's definitely still more healing to go. Like, what are the most important dietary things that I should consider every day? And then for somebody who has been on like a more traditional functional medicine path, like
Mhm.
what are the most important things they could start considering?
Okay, so for that second question, number one is stop. Just stop doing everything. Um, that's like that's the number one thing, the first thing that I do with anybody, because more than likely they're taking things like vitamin D or other supplements, or doing other dietary things, like they're eating tons and tons of dark green leafies, or taking vitamin C or other things that are making this worse. For folks like you that have, you've started on this process, number one is just being consistent, right? We talk about stable blood sugar, and that is like foundational. We've got to keep the body out of fight or flight, keep cortisol down. Because if we're fighting against our own body and our own stress response, it's going to be a struggle. We're not going to make progress. So that is absolutely step one. And in terms of long term, right, it's just being aware, like, oh, like some of the things that we've talked about with you, right? Like, okay, I've got a crazy schedule, going hard, long hours, late nights. Well, how do I support my body through more stress, through higher stress? And just figuring that out, right? It's going to be a little bit different. The fundamentals of that are similar, right? More stress, or for women, luteal phase, which is also increased stress. For some reason, the female body interprets not getting pregnant as stress. Um, so it's like, oh gosh, you didn't get pregnant. We wasted that opportunity. It was a missed opportunity. And now there's this stress response to like reset and to go into the next cycle. And so stress hormones are going to be, you're more susceptible to stress hormones during that time, during the luteal phase, heading into menstruation. So understanding that, you have to treat it that way. Okay, so that means, that's not when I should schedule my Boston Marathon. It's not when I should be, trying to set my new PR in the gym, or, whatever it is. I should be avoiding people that really trigger me, all the things, and fundamentally support our bodies during that time. So that might mean like, oh, I'm craving more sugar. Okay, well, listen to your body. You need more fuel. Sugar is fuel, and you're burning through it faster. So that doesn't mean just go out and like start, guzzling Coca-Colas. But you can have sugar. You can have more fruit. You can have more carbs. Eat it with more protein, to make sure that blood sugar response is more level and not a spike, right? But also understanding that you get more of a sugar spike in your blood if you deny yourself. If you wait too long to eat or don't eat enough, you're going to increase cortisol, which triggers gluconeogenesis. That just means making sugar. And your body is going to always overshoot and it's going to make excess sugar because now you're in a stress response. The body doesn't know that you just, waited too long to eat because you were really focused on your work or stuck in traffic or whatever. It doesn't know that that's all it is. And it thinks you're running from a bear. Doesn't know the difference. Stress hormones are stress hormones. There's no magical tag on cortisol that says, oh, this cortisol is just because, I'm stuck in my car and I didn't have a snack, versus I'm literally running from a bear. All right. So, and then especially this gets way worse, right? Is that if you are just sitting in your car and your blood sugar tanks and then it spikes, and you're not moving, right? You're not burning off this sugar. You're just sitting in your car. So this compounds it and makes it way worse. So it's always going to come down to, just being very aware of the stress and the patterns in your body and being prepared, right? My wife doesn't leave the house without me being like, got a snack? What's in your purse? You got fruit, you got meat sticks, you got, something that, because who knows, right? You might
What
not go.
I do to my partner every time, right, Drew? I'm like, do you want a meat stick? Here, take a meat stick.
Yeah. And
This,
then, it always comes down to preparation.
This is friend Elizabeth. Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth.
I can be. Just
We're in our pajamas.
Hi. Yeah, just wondering, I was the example that she gave of the functional medicine person. I have mast cell activation, Lyme disease, POTS, all the things.
Yeah.
That you gave some things that I should stop doing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why, and also tell me what I should do instead?
Yeah, sure. Well, what's POTS, right? You like, do you get dizzy?
It's heart rate, mostly tachycardia stuff. It's the hyperogenic version of POTS.
Mm-hmm. Well, it all comes down to iron regulation and distribution of oxygen and hemoglobin, right? And so and if you have and then inflammation in the arteries themselves, right, affecting circulation. So post orthostatic, right, tachycardia, you go from down to up, and all the other various ways it manifests, because the body's suffocating. What's iron's role in the blood? It's to transport oxygen. Okay, so most of the stuff that we're doing, right, when we are, this was my training too, right? So it's just like, okay, well, going through the process and trying to learn and figure this out, right, and saying to myself, geez, if I've been doing this for a while and I'm not getting to where I need to be, what's going on? There's still something in the way, right? Because our bodies are self-healing and self-correcting. One of the things I also like to teach about is, this is a great book, Psycho-Cybernetics.
Oh.
Yeah. So this guy, he was a cosmetic surgeon, like going back in like the 50s, 60s. And he was blown away because he would like gorgeous people would come in to his office and be like, I am so ugly. You've got to fix my nose, my ears, whatever. Right. And he's like, what the fuck? And then he might even, indulge them and do this surgery, and they'd come out and they'd just be like, I'm still so ugly. And you're like, what? And, and vice versa, like people who actually had, like facial deformities and things like that, and he'd fix them and they'd look great. And they might identify as the new version and be like, wow, okay. And their whole lives would change, right? Their whole identity changes. Or they still identify as disfigured and nothing changes. And so the idea of psycho-cybernetics is that like you're running this program of your self-identity, and this can be affected by a diagnosis. So if we take on and become the diagnosis, we end up, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So I always try to help people understand that like, no, that word or that acronym like POTS or whatever it is just being placed on, it's a label for how your body is managing with the conditions, right? So great. Get away from the identity first of all. Then try to understand it.
I don't actually identify. I don't really identify with
Okay,
those
great.
in that way. I've used it as a tool for like getting the right medication and stuff, But
Yeah.
I'm totally with you. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, great. I'm glad we're all on board. But the point of that is, right, is that like, wow, okay. Now we start to understand the circumstances, right? I got into a little bit of the history of nutrition, right? And this does include, the UK and Europe and everywhere else. we have to change the conditions, the circumstances under which our body is operating first.
Mhm.
If we change that, then we can change the response. Okay, because hormones and symptoms are just the response. It's how our body is coping, how our body is managing. And you can't suppress that. You can't change that with medication or supplements or any of that at all, right? So first step again is like, okay, let's simplify. Let's just support our body with the basics. Keep that blood sugar stable, right? Because remember, when iron is already messed up and you've got these symptoms going on, the hardest thing is to maintain blood sugar.
Mhm.
That's the hardest. Your body's, it's working against you at this point to try to do that because insulin resistance is part of the defense against this problem. But then, once we have that understood, right, then we can start to just support the body. So we want to try to have a snowballing effect of healing, right? Rather than trying to do things for the body, trying to force the body to do things. Because again, right, like, we take things that are reactive, right? So we go, number one thing, right? Oh, doctor's like, first thing, your vitamin D is low. It's like, well, okay. Why is my vitamin D low? Is it low because I'm deficient in a vitamin D supplement? No, absolutely not. It's the response. It's the correct response to the conditions. And if I understand that low vitamin D is a response to disease, not a cause of it, then I'm not going to focus on trying to fix that number on my blood work, right? I'm going to focus on changing the conditions that will support an optimal vitamin D level. You might be able to hear my baby just woke up from a nap. So, okay. So I don't know if we got totally off track. Are we still?
That makes sense. I'm hearing blood sugar. Is it the first place to start?
Yeah. Yeah. Blood sugar is the first place to start, right? Because you could be doing all the right things otherwise. And if you are inadvertently waiting too long to eat and your blood sugar drops, you're going to trigger the stress hormones, and the stress hormones are going to trigger the downstream effects, right? So stress is in the label of oxidative stress. It's the same thing. So anytime our stress is high, right, and we know this, there's a lot of research and studies about how, stress is a silent killer, right? Well, that's because stress hormones trigger the dominoes of this whole effect. So we have to focus on what we can control. We can control eating regularly, making sure we're having carbs, adequate protein, and avoiding, iron enriched foods, and avoiding, supplements that might be causing us, making it harder, more difficult for our body to do this work.
What are some of the supplements that are the most problematic in your eyes?
Vitamin D is probably one of the number ones because that's it's so pervasive. And going back to the idea, right, that like the D is not low because or the disease is not being caused by the low D. The low D is the response. And then what we're measuring in the blood is only one, maybe two forms we know there's at least 24 forms of vitamin D. There's even D5 or D4, I think it is D4 in mushrooms, right? So everyone knows D2, and then they think, oh, D2 is the bad one. We're not going to take that. We're going to take D3 because that's the good one. That's the active form. Well, the D3s, and especially the sulfated D3s, they're increased when the body is in anemia of chronic disease, right? So when we take that, it's a steroid, it's a hormone, and it's simulating disease. So it's even worse in healthy people because now you're exacerbating the anemia, right? So the body's sequestering more iron. So more iron is getting shoved into places, and then you're being told, oh, I have to do a liver detox or a liver cleanse, or my gut's all messed up now because iron, right, is not being managed and not being absorbed in the gut properly. So I'm having all these digestion problems. And because my liver's not working well, my bile is getting all funky and gunked up. And so now maybe I have parasites, and maybe I need to do a parasite cleanse, right? So, but because we're focusing on the symptoms and not trying to ask why is our body doing these things? So we end up just, chasing symptoms and making things worse. Yeah.
Thank you. Super
Mhm.
interesting.
What about one thing that I run into when I share my story and journey with folks is people who are like, oh, that sounds really awesome, but I'm lactose intolerant.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh man, I wish I could make you not.
Well, so yeah, drinking raw milk is like one of the easiest things to do. And that comes down to lactoferrin. So anything in biochemistry that has that Fe in the word, like ferritin, is about iron regulation. And so human breast milk, the colostrum when the baby is first born is like the highest in lactoferrin, but it's in your snot, it's in your mucosa, it's even in your tears. So it gives you an idea. Like this is everywhere in the body. It's one of the main struggles of life is being able to regulate iron to utilize it in a way that's safe, right? Because without iron and to transport oxygen, there's no cellular respiration, and you don't live. That's it. There's no life. So it's this delicate balance. And so the body has come. I mean, there must be dozens and dozens of different proteins and enzymes and hormones and things that are all directly related to iron regulation in the body, including what we think are the sex hormones. But estrogen and testosterone are more closely linked to iron status than anything else. Okay. So it's like the number one priority for the body is to regulate and manage iron. So milk, right, as we as mammals, as the last evolved group of animals, we develop the breast milk. That's the baby is not fully developed. The immune system is not fully developed, so the baby's not producing its own lactoferrin and other iron regulation molecules and everything like that. So it gets it from the breast milk. So we can get it from that milk, from the cows. Crazy camels have like super high levels of lactoferrin. And you'll hear, if you go online, you'll see thousands of stories of people like, wow, my non-verbal autistic child that used to, have to wear a helmet everywhere, still in diapers at age 12, whatever, got him on camel milk and all better. But it takes time. Doesn't happen overnight. And that's where most people get caught up, right? Because they're used to this idea like, oh, I'll take this thing, it's going to suppress my symptom, and I'm going to feel better very quickly. It doesn't work that way, especially if we are in our 30s or our 40s or older, right? You've got a lifetime of accumulated iron. That's an unavoidable fact of aging, because you are going to accumulate iron in your body. And the longer it took you to figure this stuff out, the longer it's going to take you to fix it. So if I'm lactose intolerant, well, one, it's not a real thing, but you might be sensitive. Right? Because your gut's a mess. Totally fine. Definitely don't want to go drinking, a gallon of raw milk every day if you're going to shit your pants when you get on the train. Don't do that. But again, what's going on in the gut? Okay, I've got all this iron in my digestive tract. Okay, that's causing me symptoms. It's messing up my digestion. It's suppressing my metabolism, making my digestion weaker. I'm having constant stress triggers, right? If you're walking in the woods and you're just munching away on your snacks and you're like, wow, this is so beautiful. And then you realize you're standing in between a mother bear and her cub. Your body doesn't go, well, hold on, we can't run or fight the bear yet. I got to finish digesting, right? No, your body shuts down everything that is not imperative to your immediate survival, including your digestion. So most people are going through life with these digestion problems, and they're constantly shutting down their digestion because they're inadvertently going into fight or flight. Okay. So that's one of the number one things. Then we understand this. And then we say, okay, all right, I'm going to start drinking some milk. And I've got all this weird stuff going on in my gut. And now I know that this raw milk has got all this lactoferrin and immunoglobulins and all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to start having this detox reaction in my gut because iron, iron initially causes constipation, right? Women that were pregnant, given an iron pill because they're told they're anemic, they can't poop for days. And then they're given Miralax and all this other stuff. So if we give you something that's going to bind that iron, you're going to start shitting and you're going to think you're lactose intolerant. Now, again, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be unpleasant, right? We can do this in a way that's slow, and that doesn't even mean necessarily starting with raw milk. We have supplements that will also do this, like the glucoferrin. This one is magic and probably does in 3 months what raw milk will do in a year. Okay. But that being said, everybody's got to start where they're at. So if the gut's a mess, they can't have, they don't respond well to dairy. We got to figure out what's going on. Now, that being said too, what kind of dairy? Because if it's the dairy from the store or from, most restaurants, stuff like that, a lot of that is also fortified with vitamin D and synthetic vitamin A. So that's also going to cause problems. So, we also have to consider the source. So a lot of people, maybe they start with, like a low temperature pasteurized milk or, other dairy products like from Kelowna Superfood, or they're like, well, yeah, I can't, I can't drink milk, but I do fine when I eat, cheese. Okay, great. Eat cheese. So, again, it's especially at the beginning, it's less important what you're eating. It's more important how we're eating so that we can stop the stress response that's shutting down the digestion. And then all of a sudden we can start introducing more foods. The person can actually eat enough, because that's typically another issue is not eating enough, not able to have enough protein, or not able to have enough saturated fats because it's too challenging for the compromised digestion. So it's always going to be a slow and steady improvement. Like, okay, here we can do this. This is an improvement, and just little by little. And then eventually the body goes back to self-regulating. And the immune system is now able to keep in balance, right? That it's not being overwhelmed by oxidative damage. So the inflammation's coming down, histamine is coming down. And that's because that's what's driving a lot of the food sensitivities. Like if I hear people are like, oh my gosh, seems like, every couple of months there's another food that I start reacting to. Well, yeah, because your histamine's so high. We've got to get that down.
I have another question. This is Lindsay. Sure. I was eating because I felt called out by what you said about my tendency is to get really busy during the day and then just kind of wander off and then realize that I haven't eaten in a little bit. But I'm just thinking about like influencer culture right now, even in the functional medicine, it's not much better, like we've discussed. And so the top two that I hear, I think I asked you in 24, I had a friend that had done carnivore and then was, at the time was using melatonin. I'm not sure what they're doing now, but I can't remember exactly what you said, but you explained why that was not a good idea. And then the other one that I hear a lot, not as much right now, but every once in a while, there's another wave of the methylene blue craze. So can you just speak to those two, like why, and again, maybe it makes people feel better short-term, but long-term can be really problematic.
Yeah, well, methylene blue, definitely. For people that are, in severe distress, with these iron issues, it's an iron chelator. So it is going to bind iron, but it's not a sequester. It doesn't get it out of the body. And in fact, they've shown those pictures of people who have the blue brain from taking too much of it. So that methylene blue is going to bind with that iron, and it's got to go somewhere. It's not going to get out of the body, and now it's bound. So you can actually exacerbate when when there's low iron in the blood through using that, because now there's less iron available, even if it is binding both good and bad iron. Where's it going to go? So and then your first question was about melatonin. So
I'm sorry. Yes, it was.
Well, so melatonin and cortisol.
Okay. Yeah.
Melatonin and cortisol are people think melatonin is like about sleep, but it's not. It's actually melatonin and cortisol are actually like part of the body's clock. But melatonin actually increases in nocturnal animals at the same time it increases in ours. So that's not what it's about at all. And then when we wake up in the morning, that's our blood sugar is dropping and our cortisol is increasing. Right. So now if we're doing all these things like carnivore, which I'll get into why this is happening, but carnivore is going to make us run on stress hormones. So cortisol is going to stay elevated, and we're going to need way more melatonin to counter that in the evening. Versus the opposite that we want to do is get our cortisol low as soon as possible in the morning. Almost immediately when we wake up, we want to replenish our blood sugar, because then our body will relax and say, I've got food. I don't have to stress. We don't have to go hunt a deer or something crazy right now. So I can drop my stress hormones. I don't have to make sugar, and I can relax, and cortisol comes down. But if we're doing something like carnivore or keto or even low carb, it doesn't matter how long or how perfectly you eliminate carbs and sugar from your diet. Your blood glucose cannot drop below 60 or 70, or you will go into a diabetic coma and then eventually die, right? So even if you spend your whole life just eating steak, your body's going to have to figure out a way to make sugar. And that's part of the stress response. It's simulated starvation. And at the beginning of that, you're going to feel good. Again, why? You're iron toxic, so you're insulin resistant. So eliminating the carbs at the beginning does seem to help. But you're running on stress hormones like adrenaline. So you're giving yourself this like artificial prolonged runner's high, but that also is going to run out. You're eventually going to hit the wall with all of these things, and you're not making anything better. In fact, you're making it worse. The analogy I like to use is like, if somebody says, you've got all these, blood sugar problems, or you're trying to lose weight and you're struggling, you got extra body fat or whatever it is. Just do keto, just do carnivore. That's the same as like, I've got all these car problems. Take it to my mechanic, and my mechanic says, oh yeah, just hook your car up to this donkey. You just don't put fuel in it anymore. Like, well, you're not fixing the problem. You're just, going around the problem, and the problem is still there. And now, in fact, you're using your vehicle in a way that it was not intended to be used, and is not as efficient. It's a survival mode, or a stress response. And so once you understand the relationship with stress hormones and everything that we're talking about here, it's like, well, sure, you might lose weight. You might feel a little bit better at the beginning. You're just kicking the can down the road. And that's exactly what I see. In fact, I did kind of a research experiment. And a few years ago, I took a role doing sales for V-Shred. You might have seen this guy. He's like hanging from a thing. He's like, you think losing weight means you have to do extreme exercises like this, and all that kind of stuff. You've probably seen him. So, but most of the phone calls were people who were like, yeah, I did keto, I did Atkins, I did South Beach, I did all of these things, and initially lost weight, and kept going, and then the weight started coming back on, and then I was like cutting calories more and like da 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 da. So it was just like great market research to prove that, like, yeah, we do these things, you get these short-term benefits, quote unquote benefits, but it's just the results of starvation. And eventually the body figures out another way to compensate to those conditions to keep doing what it was doing. Your body's always going to win if you're working against it. And so it's much simpler, much healthier, feels way better to just work with your body.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And for me personally, keto it felt amazing, in 2018, right? I don't know how old I was back then, maybe 30 or 30, early 30s. But in 2024, right before you and I met, I think I had done keto for the majority of that year. But I even did it like according to my cycle. So like there's 2 weeks in women's cycle where it's contraindicated. They're not consecutive, but there's like a formula. Anyway, so even though I was doing that, I still wouldn't say that it felt as good as it did way back. So just for me personally, I just haven't seen it be sustainable at all. And even in 2018, it made me a little crazy. Like I moved from South Carolina to Nashville, and I was like high on life, and then I had like the crash, and I was like up at 3 a.m., like anxious, wiry energy, just like I would get like a tablespoon of like almond butter and honey, and like just to make it through, and it hasn't been sustainable for me personally. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. That checks out. Great. Well, anything else we want to talk about? Because we're coming up on the hour. I can go a little longer if people have any other specific questions.
I did have, or my friend had a question about, I may say it wrong, but quercetin.
Quercetin.
Yeah, for histamine.
Yeah, well, I call the supplement industry Big Pharma Junior. So they find any molecule in anything that seems to do something possibly good, and then they start selling it as a supplement. Doesn't mean anything. Oliver's trying to bust in. And actually, I did experiment with quercetin for a little while, especially like early on in COVID. That was kind of a hyped molecule. But it's naturally occurring in foods that you're already eating.
Yeah.
Onions, garlic, apples, whatever. And I don't see any benefit. In fact, I've actually seen some people who didn't react well at all to taking quercetin, as well as many other supplements. So yeah, it's really a challenge, and you have to be very, very deliberate and cautious with any supplements, even things that seem totally benign, like ones that that I do use quite frequently. But if I'm getting good results without them, I'd rather.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. If I have somebody who's, they introduce raw milk and they make their dietary changes and they're like, wow, I feel great, this is fucking awesome, I'm not going to tell them to buy, glucoferrin or anything. The foundation is always going to be the nutrition and the diet. And then, if people need more support, or there's specific things that need to be addressed, or, or whatever it is for that person, then we can look at that. But the foundation, the fundamentals have to be in place first. So if somebody is like, yeah, I've still got acute Lyme infection, like, okay, great. Well, if your body's still sequestering iron into tissues where Lyme, spirochetes, and co-infections live, you're trying to battle a forest fire, and rain isn't coming. So first we got to bring the rain, and and let nature do what it needs to do to start to control the fire, and then we can help that process. And then eliminate the the excess dry brush and debris, right? Which is where that iron is accumulated, where it's has the potential to burn, right? But that's that took me probably almost 10 years, where I was, all the training that I had was just constantly taking, I did antibiotics for a long time and felt like I was going to die. So I stopped that, went on to the natural route. But it was a similar process where it was like, just kill the infection, kill the infection, kill the infection. Well, anything that can possibly kill the infection is also potentially killing you. And that, that never got anywhere. It was like, I would feel like, oh, I think I've got it under control for a little while, and then flare up. And then, oh, I think I've got it under control for a while, oh, then flare up. Because it was not changing the conditions. So it's always going to come down to that. It's always going to come down to, first, change the conditions. It's going to change the hormonal response, the biochemical response. And now we've got a whole different set of rules to play with.
At the beginning, you shared about a book, and I missed the title. Can you bring that one back?
Oh, sure. Iron, the most toxic metal. This one.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, even just the introduction is great. Like, iron excess worsens chronic illness. And then it talks about the history of the iron fortification and everything. So this is really easy to understand. And and then something it made me think about too was, like, it talks about Popeye. Everybody's seen Popeye the Sailor Man, right? He was the good guy. And how did he get super strong so he could beat up Bluto? He ate his spinach. The weirdest thing. There was like this bizarre propaganda, going back, World War II, against meat already. And, the idea, like, non-heme iron being superior. It was crazy. And then the Wimpy, right? The weird random guy walking around who's always in trouble, walking off cliffs and stuff like that, always eating hamburgers. It's so weird. But like not thinly veiled at all, like overt propaganda. And it was indicative of, like, how nutritional policy is still shaped to this day. Like, there's still demonization of dairy and meat and healthy sources of iron, and, like, the propaganda of eat the rainbow. Even that, like, was not coined by a nutritionist. It was actually a like an art designer or something like that, who worked with a chef to make a book of colorful, artful food. It was called Eat the Rainbow, and it somehow became like a policy for our national nutrition program.
Eric, I just remembered I actually have another question.
Sure.
We've never talked about cholesterol. And I just got a bunch of blood work, and it was, by the way, my biological age. Do you want to guess my biological age?
It's going to be amazing. Like 30.
27.
Nice.
And I'm almost 40.
Yeah.
And the main only things that were, like, in the red or whatever were my cholesterol numbers. And I've never had that before. Like, I had blood work a couple of years ago, and, like, nobody mentioned anything about cholesterol. And this time it was like the one that I know is, like, I mean, I could look them up. There was one that I, like, did a bunch of AI investigation about, and it was like, okay, only one of these numbers is actually something you should be concerned about. The other one, they're just high, and it's because you eat like a shit ton of butter or whatever. But there was one that was like, oh, this is not a good one.
Like, is it like ApoB or something?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Cool. All right. So yeah, I'm going to preface this by saying this is why I consider blood work a trap. So just like with vitamin D, back in like 2011 or so, they just arbitrarily changed the range. Up until that point, all healthy people in all the studies they did, even living in the equator, had levels between like 17 and 30. And then 2011, what's that?
Of the ApoB?
No, this is for vitamin D. For vitamin D.
Vitamin D.
I'll get to ApoB.
Okay.
And then in 2011, the Autoimmune Society changed the range that they thought was healthy from 30 to 100.
Interesting.
Yeah. Why? Wow. They wanted to accommodate the insane vitamin D levels that you can only get from taking a supplement. And overnight, they made everyone deficient. Crazy. Same with cholesterol. So all of your cholesterol numbers were probably well within the range until they invented Lipitor. Then they dropped the range 100 or 200 points. Like crazy. All healthy people have like 300 cholesterol.
Okay. That's what I thought. But then what's the ApoB? I just looked it up. It's 133. I mean, what does that mean? ChatGPT was like, this is maybe indicative of problems down the road, but
or just indicative of like, where was it a year or two ago? Because typically what I've seen is that like ApoB is just a very slow responding one when we're fixing all these issues, and is higher when iron and inflammation are a problem. And those are getting better, it comes down.
Interesting. I mean, I don't remember ever having a flag about this, but I would have to look.
Yeah. And again, remember, blood work is a trap. So it could have been high that day. At that moment.
So it can fluctuate like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So, yeah. And then it is considered, why is it why would AI say it's one to be concerned about? Because yes, typically in people who, ApoB is higher, there's, there may be risk of like cardiac event or things like that. Right. But it's a correlation. There's no causative relationship. Yeah, because if everything else looks good, and especially cholesterol, right? Because cholesterol should be higher, a lot, much higher than what what they think or they tell us it should be, and it's the precursor to all of our hormones.
Right.
So they get people on Lipitor and other cholesterol lowering drugs, and then their hormones get all kinds of messed up.
Yeah.
So,
cool. Great.
Yep.
Love that.
Yeah. We, trusting our bodies is probably like one of the biggest challenges, right? Because, we've been indoctrinated for several decades of Western medicine, and the whole trust the science thing that our bodies are stupid and they can't be healthy and we can't survive without, intensive intervention. But yeah, that paradigm has to shift. Like our bodies are way more intelligent, and it's telling us what it needs. And if we stop and we listen to that, it will give us the information and the clues that we need to actually find our way back to health.
I just wanted to say really quick for anyone who is considering working with Eric, maybe everyone on this call has at some point, I'm really not sure, but we actually didn't run any tests at all because my background is I had, quote, mystery symptoms for like 10 to 15 years after a lot of military vaccines. And to be honest, I had done every test imaginable. I had collected my saliva in little vials and done the Dutch test and then urine test and blood test and blah blah blah. And I was really over it, and it gets so expensive. And then I wasn't quite this level of awake, for most of that journey. But now, if you zoom out just a little bit, it's actually kind of bizarre to think that we've outsourced our power this severely to where we go in and we sit there, and on some level we're saying, please tell me about me, right? And we wait so anxiously for, them to say, am I going to make it through the night, right? And I get it because I've been there, but the truth is, like, when we get really connected to ourselves, it kind of falls away. Like, for the most part, Western medicine has fallen out of resonance entirely for me. I don't engage with it at all. And I'm not saying that to judge anyone. I'm just saying for to paint a picture of like what's possible, right? Because now if I have a question, they're just not where I go. It just doesn't feel as relevant anymore.
Yeah. Western medicine has its, what it's really good at, I mean, if to save a life, I have no qualms, if I get hit by a bus, don't take me to the acupuncturist. It's like straight to the hospital, please. But as soon as I'm off life support or whatever, and I can feed myself, or even if I just need, like, somebody to make me shakes, I can drink through everything through a straw. I don't care. Just get me out of there as soon as I can. As soon as, like, it's not necessary for keeping me alive. But yeah, that's that was definitely. And I mean, I had the same sort of break with even my naturopathic training, because it also seemed to just be about symptom management and not actually about supporting and nurturing health.
Yeah, it's crazy. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks everybody for hopping on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have this recording. If anybody needs it, I'll probably post that somewhere. And yeah, feel free to share it. And then, yeah, if this was helpful, let me know. I'll probably do another one in a couple weeks. And yeah, thanks everybody.
Yay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.